Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todos. Soy Iria Pérez, formo parte del equipo de redacción de Palco 23 como coordinadora editorial del grupo Cinnamon News. Después de estas 2 jornadas en las que hemos conocido testimonios en primera persona de empresarios y expertos del sector del deporte, ahora toca el punto de poner datos, que son también claves a la hora de encarar esta nueva etapa que arranca el sector. Es por eso que hemos pedido a Kantar World Panel que nos arroje un poco de luz y que nos comparta esos datos que han estado recopilando durante este año tan atípico. Conecta desde Reino Unido, que dará una ponencia en inglés, Andy Saxton. Hello, Andy. Andy es Consumer Insight Director de Kantar World Panel en Reino Unido desde 2017, aunque lleva trabajando en la multinacional desde 2013. Andy cuenta con una amplísima experiencia en investigación de mercado en industrias como la moda, el entretenimiento o las telecomunicaciones. Antes de darle paso, os recuerdo como siempre que podéis hacer las preguntas a través de la plataforma, tanto en castellano como en inglés, y que se las trasladaremos a él al finalizar su ponencia. Thank you very much, Andy. It's all yours.
Great, thanks very much. Great, well, thanks everyone for joining for this session. So what we're going to cover today is a Kantar view on the new wave of sports consumers that we've seen come into the market this year. It's been a really interesting time for the market. A lot of challenges, but what we've seen is a lot of the market in growth. So plenty of really great opportunities potentially to win. Okay, so the key things we're going to cover today. So we're going to look through the key changes in consumer behaviour that we've seen, what's been a real year of turmoil in the market. But then look specifically at what impact that's actually had across the sports and fashion markets. And then really dive down into this new wave of sports and fitness shoppers in the market, understand a little bit more about who they are and how we can actually win with them. And then look ahead to the future. So what's the rest of the year potentially going to look like? Where are the big opportunities really going to be within the market? Just a quick introduction to me and the agency. So hopefully you've heard of Kantar before, so you just had a little intro there. In terms of where we're getting the data from that I'll be talking you through today, so it's all based on GB purchasing, so the Great Britain population. Our main sources across 2 panels. So we've got a clothing and footwear panel of 15,000 people. So they record all their sports clothing and footwear purchasing with us. And then we've got basically our total market panel. So that's 90,000 people, and they record absolutely everything that they buy. So that enables us to pick up all kinds of sports equipment and the different sports that people are interested in and which they participate in. We also run a lot of ad hoc surveys as well across both of those panels. So that's where all this information today is coming to you from. A very brief intro to me. So yeah, I work at Kantar, so I head up the fashion and sports side of things as an insight director with Kantar in GB. And my personal interest, as you can see there, keen runner in all weathers. Being from Manchester originally, big football fan. Won't talk about that too much given our current form, but hopefully the Manchester accent is okay for everybody to understand today. So moving on to look at what the big consumer changes that we've seen this year have been. So really across Europe, some quite stark headlines across the fashion market overall. Minus 14% across Europe this year. And you can see that really across the board, different countries, largely affecting in quite similar ways. So while I'm talking to you, primarily with the UK background and what's happened there, the lessons that we've taken from it really are applicable across Europe and specifically within Spain. The key thing that we've seen within our market is that as consumer confidence rises and falls within the market, there's a real clear link with fashion and clothing purchasing in general within the market. So as confidence drops, the clothing and the fashion purchasing, that drops immediately as well. And the main reason behind that is there's some really big occasions that people like to buy for that have just become much less relevant this year. So because people can't get away on holiday, people don't need as much for general day-to-day wear. Obviously, we're all working in different environments. I'm presenting to you today from my lounge rather than from an office. And less socialising, less going out occasions in the evening as well. So much fewer really big occasions. So that's taken a huge amount of spend out of the market. And we can see that across both Spain and in Great Britain as well. Back in February, the markets were relatively stable. We actually had slight decline in Britain, but relatively stable in the markets. But as soon as COVID-19 hit, as soon as that lockdown began in both countries, massive declines. So over 50% of the market was lost within a month. And that really continues over the next few months within the market. One positive thing to take out of it is how quickly a market can recover. So although we saw declines of over 50% during lockdown, actually as soon as some of those lockdown restrictions started to be eased, the markets did pick up relatively quickly. And actually, if we look at our latest data going into September, across both Spain and Britain as well, the declines were less than 10%. So there's a lot of restrictions that are still in place across both countries. But people do have the appetite to get back out there and get shopping again. We actually found that when we surveyed our panel, 9 out of 10 people said that they wanted to get back to shopping as normal as they used to before. So there is a real consumer desire for things to return back to normal. And although things have been different this year, people do want to keep shopping, and that won't go away. So when restrictions are eased, people will come back into the market. But in terms of which industries, fared better and bounced back quicker, the great thing to see is that, those sports and activity stores, they bounce back much quicker than anything else. So this is looking at an index of store activity on a rolling weekly basis. So obviously, as we went into lockdown, there was no activity at all within stores. And then in Britain, once we got stores back open, heading into July, really big uplift for sports and activity stores. So there's a real consumer appetite there for buying sports products that was really evident. As soon as stores opened, that's one of the first places where people rush back to get to. So why did sports do so well amidst the context of a really challenging market elsewhere? Well, one of the key things we've seen is that sports and fitness has proved to be a really great way for people to stay both physically but also mentally fit during what's been a really difficult year. While many things have been restricted, actually being able to get outside and to exercise is one of the few kind of pleasures that people can still take from life. And this is really reflected in the clothing and footwear that people have been buying. So if we look at the reasons why people are buying clothing and footwear, again, despite those massive declines in the market, all these occasions on the right-hand side have been in really strong growth in the market. So buying for fitness, up by 4%. And that's even bearing in mind that gyms and a lot of leisure facilities have been closed, but people buying for fitness is still up by over £10 million. Running and jogging up by nearly 100%. It was nearly doubled in size compared to last year. And outdoor pursuits, so things like walking and hiking, seeing similar levels of strong growth as well. So real positives there for the market, that while people are cutting back in certain areas, sports and fitness is becoming much more important in times. And it looks like to be continuing as well. It's not just a lockdown behaviour, it's actually something that's really continued as we've progressed through lockdown. And even once restrictions have been eased, people have continued to make purchases within these areas. And the interesting thing to see is the people who are buying sportswear are once again buying them to play sports. which sounds a little bit of a strange prospect because it's sportswear, so you think, of course, it's bought to play sports, but obviously a lot of the growth that we've seen within the market over the past couple of years is people who buy sportswear more often than not actually buying it, not actually to play sports. So they're buying sportswear, but just for everyday wear, for leisure wear, for relaxing around the house, just with a sports brand attached to it. We've seen that really flipped on its head over the last few months, and the massive growth that we've seen within sportswear is pretty much solely driven by people wanting to actually use it to play sport. So, you know, the way that you position your sports equipment and your sports clothing and footwear needs to shift back towards, you know, those actual sporting pursuits rather than the everyday kind of leisure wear that we've seen a lot of strength from over the past couple of years. Obviously, an important consideration as well is that not all sports benefit from this. So there's still plenty of restrictions that mean that certain sports are still going to really struggle. So in Britain, what that area that's really struggled amongst others has been swimming. So swimming has seen declines similar to what we saw across the rest of the market, down by nearly 50%. A lot of swimming pools have been closed. It's probably a little bit different for you guys in Spain, but certainly for us, the prospect of swimming outside in a British winter isn't very appealing to many people. So again, there needs to be the ability for people to actually follow these pursuits to see that growth. So it's not universal growth across sport. It's worth bearing in mind. But if we look at the biggest growers within the market, and this is across the total market, two of the biggest growers are the big sports brands. So both Nike and Adidas growing at around 10% year on year, which is a huge performance given the context of what's happening elsewhere. And a lot of the traditional big sports products are driving this. So across the board, both sports tops, sports bottoms driving it. And even though people can get outside less, we're still seeing growth of 5% within trainers. So just because people are staying at home a little bit more doesn't mean that they're actually not buying footwear. We've seen a similar trend in Spain as well. So during the lockdown, we saw, again, the same two brands there, so Nike and Adidas, actually moving to be within the top 10 players overall within the Spanish fashion market. So it's having such a big impact, the growth in sports, that it's actually impacting the biggest brands overall within the market. And some of that has continued again in Spain as lockdown restrictions have been eased, the likes of Sprinter remaining within the top 10 within the market. And the great thing that we've seen about this growth within sports is the number of new shoppers that it's brought to the market. So 2.6 million people who bought an item of sports within the last half year have been completely new to the market. So that means they didn't buy anything to do with sports for a sporting need in the 2 years before that. So they're completely new to the market. So a huge volume of new shoppers suddenly coming into the market. And actually what you see with this group is, although a lot of them, as you'd expect, say they enjoy keeping fit and healthy, actually that's a much lower proportion than average. So on average, people who buy sports products, 80% of them say they enjoy keeping fit and healthy. Actually, a third of the new shoppers aren't as excited about keeping fit and healthy. So again, we need to think about that in our messaging. These new people coming in are probably not people who've got a lot of experience within sports and fitness. So they need encouraging in a slightly different way. It's probably needs a little bit of guidance to get them into the market. They need a bit more encouragement to actually maintain these behaviours ongoing. And it's also got a real new generation as well. So about half the spend has come from the 40s. And that's a big reflection of what we've seen happening across the wider market, is that the younger population have maintained their spend in these times at a much greater level than the older population. So the younger shoppers are actually in spend growth again overall in the market, whereas we're still seeing declines from those older shoppers. we've seen a real benefit across a variety of sports categories. So overall, a huge proportion, so 1 in 2 of us across Britain have purchased an item related to sports or fitness in lockdown. And while the area that I've been talking about, clothing and footwear, has been the biggest area that people have bought for, there's a lot of other areas that tie into that as well. So over 10% of people have bought some sports equipment, whether that's a football, a yoga mat, some weights to do a home workout, and even things to tie into that new lifestyle. So fitness food, accessories, so mobile phone apps that can support your workouts, all these kind of things tie in together. So really when we talk about this sports growth, it's really important to think about it as a real change in people's lifestyles. It's not just a single activity, it's something that really affects both the clothes they wear, but also the things they talk about, the social media that they use, the nutrition and the diet plan that they follow. So there's a lot of different touch points within their lives where we can access them. And that's the key thing when we think about how to win with these new shoppers, is not to think about them within that confined space, and actually to think about their broader lifestyle choices that may now be changing as they get more into a health and fitness kind of mindset. And again, what's really positive to see is that there's a good proportion of people who plan to actually increase this post-lockdown. So we always knew that there was going to be a bit of a boost during lockdown while people were more restricted and they couldn't do the normal things that they would normally be doing. But actually, a lot of people who weren't doing it before said that they plan to increase post-lockdown. The key thing to bear in mind with the things that they're planning to do is the big areas that jump out where we're expecting to see an increase tends to be the more individual and home pursuits. So there's still going to be a real big challenge for team sports. We know that there's ongoing restrictions about how much people can interact with other households, how much we can do in terms of team sports. But things such as cycling, home workouts, running, yoga, if the pools are open or if the weather's good enough for swimming, all these pursuits are much easier for individuals to take on board. They're really easy to get started with, and they're less likely to be restricted by having to interact with other households. So that's where we're anticipating to see the biggest uplift ongoing within the market. And the key way to get to these consumers, so the biggest increase that we've seen is through these different channels about how people are tapping into the market. So the biggest single area has been on YouTube. So 42% of people have actually used YouTube for some either fitness or training type program or advice during the lockdown period. So nearly half the people have at least experimented or looked into a YouTube video. What we've seen is that there's a huge potential for brands to actually partner up with these kind of areas. So the example that I've got here is from Under Armour, one of the biggest brands within Britain. And they've got a partnership with a workout program. So it's getting your brand seen as people come into this market, getting people associating your brand with their new hobby. Similarly, in terms of apps, so things like the Nike Training Club, has been around for a number of years, but given the new shoppers in the market, takes on a new relevance as a way to keep people really engaged with your brand as they come on this new journey. And we've also seen a lot of other social media activity tapping into it as well. And, retailers who wouldn't traditionally be thought of as sporting retailers. So Primark in Britain, who are very much a kind of traditional clothing, discount value focused retailer. Actually, they've seen the potential here and they've been running a partnership with a popular fitness trainer within Britain. And they've been hosting workouts on their Facebook page. So even retailers who aren't traditionally associated with sports are really seeing the potential to tap into these new areas. The challenge that we may see is because for a lot of people, it's a new area and they've come in, they've tried sports and fitness, they've picked up a new hobby, but a lot of them remain unsure. So 40% of people are a bit unsure if they're going to keep buying sports equipment related to this post-lockdown. So, that can have a really big impact in Q4 alone. Getting those people to continue purchasing could be worth over £150 million. So targeting these people, keeping that momentum, making sure that they're enjoying that hobby and that it's something they want to maintain long term is going to be really important as we look to try and harness this growth over the long term rather than just as a short term boom within the sector. And a key thing to bear in mind is just because people are saying that they don't plan to buy or they don't plan to continue, don't give up on them. So we saw a really interesting progression during lockdown. We asked people on our panel if they were going to buy any clothing and footwear purchases during lockdown. We had quite a big proportion of them who say, no, they wouldn't buy, it wasn't their priority, they were going to drop out of the market completely. What we did was we tracked what they actually went on to do, and within a 4-week period, they spent £340 million within the market. So what people say they're about to do, or what people intend to do, versus what actually happens over the course of time can be very different. So don't give up on shoppers who say that they maybe don't plan to go out and buy, because we know that the changing dynamic, within people's lifestyles and within the markets can be really changeable on quite a short-term basis. And there's clearly a huge amount of spend that can still be won within those shopper groups. It is worth thinking about changing your approach slightly given the quarter that we're currently in. So buying for fitness so far this year has been clearly the biggest driver of growth. Traditionally, within Q4, as we head into that Christmas period, buying sport clothing and footwear as a gift rather than for yourself becomes a bigger occasion. So if we're going to maintain this momentum that we've seen within the market, the size of gifting and the importance of gifting over Christmas and buying presents for friends and family, particularly those people who've probably just started, maybe they've just started running, they've just got into yoga, that's going to be a really key area to tap into going into Christmas, for people buying gifts for people's new hobbies. And it's never too early to think about it. So obviously we're into November now. We asked our panel whether they'd thought about it even a couple of weeks ago, back in mid-October. And based on 2019, over a third of people have already started doing their Christmas shopping by mid-October. I wish I could say the same. I'm way behind that. I don't normally start until December, unfortunately. But clearly that's not the case for a lot of people in the market. And even 6% of people are really very organised and say that they've actually purchased everything by the middle of October. So really important to think about your Christmas messaging as early as you can within the year, because there are consumers out there from as early as the start of October. But obviously this year, Christmas is going to be very different. We normally see a big uplift from people buying to go to parties and social gatherings, which won't be happening to the same extent. So I know a lot of countries, Britain included, is about to go into a new lockdown starting tomorrow. So that's going to restrict these kinds of activities. It's going to limit the amount of Christmas shopping that we can do during November. So, the importance of thinking about those shopping occasions, they're going to be really different this year. So to maximise that, it's going to be about, prolonging that Christmas period as much as we can, about thinking about how people are making those trips. We know that when people come out to shop, they're not browsing as much. It's not as enjoyable an experience. So generally people get out, they know what they want to buy. They want it to be a quick, efficient experience. So us as brands and retailers need to think about how we best maximise that experience, given that it won't be the full, long, enjoyable shopping trip that it normally would be. But Christmas gifting does remain there as a really big area. We've actually seen a bit of a shift within Britain of back to a more experiential type gifting occasion. So people buying holidays, trips away, concert tickets, things for sporting events. Obviously that will be harder. So things like sporting equipment, running gear, yoga mats, they will become much more important as gifts going into this year. And given the ongoing restrictions, the final thing to think about is how important it will be to win online to maximise this period. Going into lockdown, so at the start of this year, we only had 20% online. That jumped up to 60% during lockdown, and it has really maintained. So even though stores reopened, still around 40% of all spend stayed online. So a lot of people who came and started buying online actually continued that behaviour even when stores had reopened. And there is a large group of consumers who aren't comfortable yet going back into store and are still continuing to, maintain that spend online, and that's likely to continue as that becomes more of a regular habit for them. And it's even more important for sports. So we've seen a big jump up in general across from year to year. But actually in sports, it's an even bigger increase. So in Britain, 68% of spend on sports in the latest 12 weeks has been through online channels. So it's much bigger. And what we also know is that 1 in 2 of those new online shoppers who haven't tried online before have continued to then buy online again. So people who maybe didn't trust online before are now becoming much more enthusiastic about continuing to buy online. And it's an area that taps into sports and leisure really well, and there's a really good fit with online. It's twice as likely as average to see a big uplift in online spend. So for our industry, it's really important to think about how we can maximise online. If we compare that to Spain, the curve's a little bit further behind, but yeah, really useful to see where we are in Britain, hopefully, and that online spend has continued to grow and has really accelerated this year. So we've seen a big jump up within Spain, within sportswear, so up from 14 to 25%. So a little bit behind where we are in Britain, but you can see the potential for further growth as what we've got in our market is twice the level that we see there. And the key message that I'd ask you all to think about as well is just how quickly you react. So it's always been important to react quickly, but now so more than ever. 8 of the 10 brands who we saw grow in the first month post-lockdown have continued to grow share since. So that first mover advantage is a really good indicator of what we can expect happen in the rest of the quarter. So there's so much happening, but the need to be agile to respond quickly is going to be really important to dictate how successful your long-term performance actually will be. I'll just quickly summarise the key points that we've discussed there. So sports has seen a really big boost this year during lockdown, but we expect that to continue to grow. There's a lot of new shoppers within the market. It's been seen as a really good way for people to look after their physical and mental health during these times. The big standout growers were those, the big brands, the likes of Nike and Adidas. But as consumers repeat and they learn more about the market and get more experience, they are likely to experiment more. So think about ways in which you can, access them and partner up with them in order to get those additional purchases. The best way to do that is through thinking about the media that they're accessing. So the likes of YouTube, mobile phone apps, and even social media have been really important. And think about key seasonal events as well. So gifting at the moment being the biggest one in order to win throughout 2020. And then think about, the future importance of online. We've seen a big jump up in the importance of online. The size that it currently is in Great Britain shows the potential future trajectory for where the market could get in Spain. And the key thing to bear in mind is with these new online shoppers, the people who've tried online for the first time, that's that 1 in 2 of them have continued to make more purchases online since trialing online. So there's a fairly good conversion of people who are new to online, but then have continued purchasing since. So we're likely to continue to see that online momentum continue for a number of months within the market. So that's all from me. So thanks for listening. I believe we can now go and see if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's been a very interesting presentation. So now let's move on to the Q&A section. We have plenty of them. The first one is, you mentioned before that Primark has seen the opportunity of entering the sportswear industry, and they are asking if that can happen the other way around, if Nike or Adidas can be competitors for Zara or H&M or even Primark in casual wear.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely works both ways. I think, yeah, Primark are a good example, as a lot of other fashion retailers have been doing. Of the fashion market has struggled a little bit even before COVID. So what they were doing was looking at growth areas, and sports and activewear was a growth area. So they've been diversifying their range to grow in that way. But yeah, I think because of that growth and because of the importance of buying sports for other non-sporting reasons, there's clearly opportunity for sports brands to actually branch out. And we do see a big proportion of people still buying not for sporting occasions. So yeah, there's definitely potential for it to work both ways.
Linked to that, they are asking what is going to happen once we go back out and go have dinner with our friends to a restaurant, go to the cinema. What is going to happen with the consumption of sportswear? Is it going to change at all?
I mean, yeah, I think it will change. We can take some learnings from what happened once the first lockdown restrictions started to be eased. What we did see was there was a slight slowing of the sportswear growth because people could do other things again. So as you say, people could go back to the shops, people could go and meet friends again, they could go to restaurants, but we didn't see it flatten completely. So we still saw really good growth within the sports and fitness market. So the key takeout seems to be that the people who have tried it during lockdown actually really enjoyed it, and they started doing it long enough that it has become a regular hobby for them. So it seems like the momentum is there for it actually to continue growing even when restrictions are lifted.
Also for the use at home for what people that buy sportswear just to chill at home as well.
Yeah, that's right, and I think it's made it a much more accessible industry for a lot of people. I think the traditional view of sports as like professionals and team sports and going to a gym that's full of really fit people and big muscly men and things like that can actually be quite daunting for people who aren't naturally as fitness and sports obsessed as some people. So actually trying a YouTube video in the comfort of your own home where you've got privacy, or just going for a walk or a run around the streets near where you live, is a much more accessible way for people to actually get into these markets. So it's really broadened out the potential audience that we have within the sports industry.
Mm-hmm. We have also one regarding distribution. They ask that Nike and Adidas and Under Armour are focusing their strategies on the direct-to-consumer channels. So they ask what is going to happen with independent retailers, multi-brand retailers. Yeah,
it's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, we're certainly seeing, especially with online becoming so big, all retailers, multi-channel retailers, and those who have interest in so many different areas are having to try and respond really quickly. And the biggest challenges we've seen in the market are probably those retailers who play in too many different areas, that because things are changing so quickly, it's been really hard to adapt. So the likes of Nike and Adidas using that direct-to-consumer channel is a really simple, direct proposition. Some of the retailers that we've seen in the market who have multiple channels that they sell through, who have multiple industries that they sell products in, while that's been an advantage historically, in that they're diversified and they can benefit in lots of areas, it's been really difficult for them to adapt and tap into different needs. So the biggest thing that we've seen in the market is really, one, as I said, is that need to respond quickly. So those retailers who are most agile and can tap into changing consumer demand, it's within a matter of days rather than weeks or months as it maybe used to be, is going to be the most important thing. And the bigger retailers who play in so many different areas are going to struggle unless they can, become more agile in how they respond.
Talking about agile and big, they're asking if Amazon can become the champion of sportswear distribution.
Yeah, I mean, they've been an interesting one to follow. Certainly one of the biggest growers within the market over the past few months. I mean, they've been trying, they're obviously huge online already. They have been trying, to become bigger within sports and fashion. And we've seen, some growth, but fairly slow, the level of growth that we've seen up until this year. What this year has done for them is it's really unlocked a huge amount of extra potential. So because so many new people are buying within sports and they're doing so online, Amazon has been the natural place where people have gone. They've done really well during the pandemic because whilst a lot of retailers have struggled to maintain, delivery and shipping and customer service and all those kind of things, Amazon are one of the few retailers who have the capacity to meet that demand. So it's really given them, quite a quick step up to getting a bigger foothold within the market that maybe would have taken them another 2 or 3 years to actually reach the position that they currently find themselves in.
And from the biggest one to the smallest one, they ask, how can I compete with Nike if I have just a small local sportswear brand? Yeah,
I mean, I think the key thing with that is, well, one channel becomes really important, and obviously online becomes a great leveler. That as long as you have a good website, before we saw it's really difficult to compete with. Some of the retailers within Britain have 500-600 plus stores, so really difficult to compete at a store level. But when the market shifts more online, there is more of a level playing field to start off with. So that's really helpful. I think the key thing for me beyond that would be just to think about these new shoppers who come in. So these people who are new to sports, new to fitness, we know that they don't necessarily enjoy the market and the area as much as other people. So they're probably a little bit more nervous. They need a little bit more guidance. So they probably want a bit more of a personalized experience. It's really difficult for, a huge multinational brand like Nike and Adidas to maybe give that personalized experience, though clearly Nike do that with things like the training app that they've got. But what a smaller brand can actually do is appeal to that personalized nature for someone who's maybe less comfortable in the market, to actually take them on that journey with you and show them that you're with them every step of the way. You can educate them on it, you can help them train, you can teach them what the right products are to have, and make them feel that there's more of a partnership as they come on that journey with you.
Well, with that advice, we'll wrap it up for today. Thank you very much, Andy, for your time. It's been so interesting.
Great. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. Y para los que estáis al otro lado de la pantalla, solo daros las gracias de nuevo. Aquí concluimos la segunda jornada de Sports Business Meeting y, por supuesto, permitidme dar las gracias de nuevo a CaixaBank, Cruyff Institute, el Ayuntamiento de Barcelona, la Liga y Mundo Deportivo por todo su apoyo. Volvemos mañana con más Sports Business Meeting.